What's going on, everybody? Happy Friday afternoon. Welcome in to the weigh-in. We are presented by FanDuel. I'm your host, Brendan Glasheen, joined by Sean Zerillo, Action Network senior editor and former MMA fighter. He's our Action Network MMA analyst, Billy Ward. We're breaking down the biggest fights of UFC 291, dishing out best bets. We've got 12 fights in total on the card, 5 on the main, 4 prelims, 3 early prelims. ESPN Plus is your go-to spot to watch these fights. And you can also catch the back end, the main card on pay-per-view or ESPN Plus as well. All goes down this weekend from the Delta Center in Salt Lake City. The blockbuster event gets started at 6:30, prelims at 8, main card at 10 Eastern, again, via pay-per-view. The weigh-in, again, is sponsored by our friends at FanDuel. FanDuel has an exclusive offer for viewers. Get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets, up to $200. So that's right, quick math. You bet $20, you'll land $200 in bonus bets. Win or lose, terms and conditions apply. There we go. There's the housekeeping for UFC 291. Let's dive right in. Main event, co-main event. We have Dustin Poirier, the favorite, Zerillo at -164. Justin Gaethje, the underdog, at +128. So when you look at this fight, and I'm fascinated to hear your analysis on the location, this does play an impact into how you'll break this one down. Assess the matchup for us, that wrinkle that you want to discuss, and then how you want to bet it.
Yeah, so I like the fight to end inside the distance here, up to about -270, projected this closer to -300, about 75% implied. And as you mentioned, Brendan, I think the location, the fights being in Salt Lake City, Utah, is going to have a big impact, not only on the main event, but on the card overall. Now, the main event, the only 5-round fight on the card, so likely in rounds 4 and round 5, these guys could be completely exhausted. They're also going to be putting a lot of attritional damage on each other too. Justin Gaethje with the leg kicks, Dustin Poirier hitting the body. We saw the body shots from Charles Oliveira really add up quickly against both guys. And I think at this stage of their careers, relative to when they fought 5 years ago, they're both much less durable than they were earlier in their careers. So I think a finish on either side is very likely. There might be a filling out process early where both of them are sort of getting a feel for what the other wants to do, adjustments they might have made relative to the previous bout, trying to figure out each other's game plan for this fight specifically. But at some point, I do expect the pace to go pretty nuclear and get wild until somebody falls. So fight to end inside the distance here, as I said, projected closer to 75%. Like it up to about -270 as a straight bet, or you could use it as a parlay piece up to -285. I think, though, the fight is probably going to swing on which fighter has better cardio. Billy will get into it more, but Justin Gaethje does train at elevation. I think it probably points to his direction in terms of being the right side at the pricing, but no actual pick for me in terms of a money line wager.
And looking latest at FanDuel, Poirier -152. So that's come down slightly. Billy Ward is the author of the UFC luck ratings, usually every week. He's pretty consistent on this. Great write-up. Dives into potential edges if a fighter is undervalued, if a fighter may be overvalued. And Billy, you've identified for this particular fight that it's pretty fair, that the line makes a lot of sense to you. So with that all being said, how would you like to bet this one?
Yeah, it is a fairly close line, but that's to be expected with these guys. Since they fought each other, they both have 2 losses. They've both lost to Khabib, and they've both lost to Charles Oliveira. No shame in either of those, 2 of the best lightweights we've seen in a very long time. The reason Poirier is favored, and rightfully so, I'd say, is he's fought a little bit tougher competition in that time frame than Justin Gaethje, but not by a ton. These guys are both still fighting primarily top 10, top 15 guys. As Sean kind of teed me up, the one big factor I think that matters here is Gaethje's cardio. You know, we're talking about a lot this card, this one being an elevation. This is the only one that goes 5 rounds. And Gaethje trains in Denver, whereas Dustin Poirier, trains at his home gym in Louisiana and then does his fight camps in Florida, which obviously neither of those really prepare you well to fight at elevation. I also think the leg kicks of Justin Gaethje are a big factor as well. Those tend to add up over time versus Poirier, while he does throw a lot of body shots, primarily punching to the head, finishes a lot of fights that way. Those is kind of binary. Either you knock a guy out or you didn't. Obviously within a combination or whatever, 3 or 4 in a row. But a punch from round 1 doesn't really have a lot of impact on what's happening in round 4 the way that a leg kick does. So for that reason, my favorite bet on this is actually Justin Gaethje live. Kind of hoping that Poirier has some early success, empties the tank a little bit. Gaethje's defense looked a lot better against Rafael Fiziev than we'd seen him in any previous fight. So if he's able to avoid some of that, take some of that energy away from Poirier, but still end up at plus 150, plus 170, plus 200 after round one, that would be my favorite angle. As far as a pre-fight pick, though, I do like Gaethje at the odds. I wouldn't take him much past where he is now, and it's bounced around throughout the week, as Brendan mentioned. But just the cardio factor and how close it is, if this one goes to a decision, I want to be holding an underdog ticket. It's not going to be really clear who won. So I like having that plus money if it does make it all the way to the end.
Poirier 9-2 over his last 11. You mentioned the losses, Khabib and Oliveira. As for Gaethje, 7-4 over his last 11. Zerillo, I didn't ask you this on the podcast this morning, the UFC betting preview over on the Action Network podcast, if you need the audio version. Do you have any interest in a live angle, possibly, if it gets to a price that makes sense to you and fits your model?
So most of my live angles are pre-scripted, and my initial lean going into this fight was to go with Dustin Poirier. But the more I thought about it, just the elevation factor, I think Billy pointed it out. If anything, it probably helps Gaethje. If this fight was at sea level, if they were fighting in Vegas, anywhere else but in Utah, I think the cardio would be pretty similar. But the fact that Gaethje is literally fighting in thin air like he trains with every day, I think that kind of has to give him an advantage. You see these NFL teams go to Denver earlier in the year and they sort of struggle. Fighting at elevation, playing sports at elevation is a completely different animal. And it's kind of tough to judge how athletes throughout this card, not only in this fight, but athletes throughout this card are going to deal with it. Because the last time the UFC went to Utah, there was a consistent meltdown in almost every fight from one particular fighter, and often a fighter who was leading, who maybe just exerted more energy in the early round. So it's really tough to say. I have a couple of live angles on this card that I'm going to be targeting. This wasn't one that I pre-scripted, but certainly going to have the apps open. And if it looks like Gaethje is just ramping up those leg kicks, getting that cumulative damage, yeah, I think I'd be interested just because, the combination of the cardio angle plus the cumulative damage on the legs, I think would be a huge factor.
All right. Cardio and go ahead, Billy.
Before we move on, of course, it depends on the price too. I'm not going to blindly fire Gaethje's money line after round one if he has a great round and is minus 300, but Poirier is ready to come back after him. So, with anything live, it depends on the price. Round one or round two, if we get longer odds, I'm not betting it at the pre-fight odds. I'm certainly not betting it if Gaethje moves to favored odds, just because this one could swing in the drop of a dime if one of the fighters hits that wall before the other.
Want to make one more point. In the first fight, there was a huge discrepancy in the head striking stats versus the leg striking stats. Gaethje, as we said, outlanded him, I believe, 50-11 on leg kicks, but Dustin almost tripled him up on head strikes. And judges tend to be a little bit more favorable towards the strikes that are landing in the head. As Billy pointed out, though, Gaethje's striking defense looked better in his last fight against Fiziev. I think his boxing has leveled up since the first fight. Poirier's leg kick game is also leveled up too, but I think the boxing, the difference, the gap between those might have closed just enough to make it look like it's a pure coin flip fight. So, all of these things sort of just point towards Gaethje, the cardio, the elevation, the fact that the gap in the boxing and the head strikes might be closer than the first fight. So yeah, I lean towards Gaethje, but fight to end inside the distance is my bet.
All righty. We will now grind and find. Let's talk favorite underdogs for UFC 291. We have a consensus underdog, but we do have news as it pertains to the fighter that you both like for UFC 291. Michael Pereira, still available at FanDuel, plus 130 as an underdog play. Pereira did miss weight, which is concerning because we don't know if the fight will happen. But say it does, Zerillo, you'll go first. Why Michael Pereira jumps out to you as a dog that makes sense.
But it's actually Michelle, and it's always cracked me up because I was thinking the scene from Dodgeball. It's Michelle. I actually don't mind the weight miss for Pereira here, and I'll tell you why. He was already going to be the bigger man in this fight. He has trouble making 170 in the past because he's such a big fighter for the division. As soon as they get in the cage, when he's in there with these other welterweights, he looks like he's a half division to a full division bigger than them. It's tough. Between 170 and 185, you have that 15-pound difference. So he looks noticeably bigger against the other welterweights he fights. He was already going to be bigger than Stephen Wonderboy Thompson in this fight. He's also, and this is probably the most important factor, 11 years younger. And as we routinely talk about younger fighters at the UFC level, I'm sure throughout other levels of MMA, but we have stats for the UFC level, win about 10% more often than expectation when there's about a 10 or 11 year age gap between the two fighters. And I'm putting expectation in line with their closing betting odds. So they win about 10% more often than the betting odds suggest. Betting odds average about 61%. Their win rate average is closer to 71%. On top of that, things we like to look for when we bet the underdog, more finishing upside and the grappling upside. I think the cardio is going to be huge on this card, as we said. I think the cardio might lean towards Wonder Boy, even though he's 40 years old. He has the kind of fighting style where he's able to keep a pretty good pace across 15 minutes, doesn't overexert himself, doesn't typically get into high-paced fights, on top of the fact that Pereira typically slows down in the third round and missed weight. But don't mind the weight miss because he didn't miss by a pound. He missed by 4 pounds. He didn't drain himself out trying to get all the way down to 170. When these fighters miss by a half pound, a pound, seems like they really depleted themselves. There's a guy, Salvador, on the card as well, who looks like he completely depleted himself trying to make weight, whereas Pereira didn't necessarily do that. And it might actually help him in terms of the grappling. As I said, he has the grappling advantage. The striking should favor Wonder Boy, but Pereira kind of has this unpredictable capoeira style where he's going to throw things that are unorthodox, that a karate style fighter may not be able to get out of the way of as easily if he's not expecting it, not getting the reads like he normally would from a traditional boxer or a kickboxer. So a lot of reasons to like Pereira, but I think mainly the age, the size, the athleticism, and the grappling upside at plus money. Projected him closer to plus 115, like him down to about that number.
My apologies. I'll confront White Goodman and let him know of my mistake. Nobody makes me bleed my own blood. Time for you, Billy Ward. I won't call you Billy Blade or Blazer Ward. But if Michel Pereira does go against Stephen Thompson, that's an if, but say it does, anything to add to Zerillo's analysis?
Yeah, just a little bit. This is one from the luck ratings I pointed out earlier in the week. He was about plus 145. I said I expect him to close around plus 130. So nailed that one. Still like him at plus 130, though. Sean hit most of the big points. The one I just wanted to mention, I think Michel Pereira, depending on which style he brings to this fight, might kind of be a kryptonite for a karate style fighter. We've seen this in the past with other karate or traditional martial artists, but they really have a hard time when a guy is in their face, putting pressure on him and throwing multiple strikes. Stephen Thompson, if you throw one shot at him, he's going to pick that off, counter it, and make you pay for it. If you throw 3, 4, and then mix in a takedown and shove him up against the fence and close the range, and all those things we've seen Michel Pereira do recently, that's going to be a hard time for Stephen Thompson. So I'm a little bit nervous that Michel has too much fun kind of dancing around on the outside, doing some capoeira stuff and letting Thompson pick him off. But we've seen him get away from that a little bit in his recent fights and then still use it when the opportunity presents itself. So there's a little bit of uncertainty here, but that's why we're getting plus money, right? I wouldn't take that uncertainty at a favorite. At his price now, I like it. Hopefully he just kind of swarms him with boxing, mixes in some takedowns. And then if he's got him wounded or stunned, then do your cartwheel kick or your backflip guard pass or whatever else. So a little bit of uncertainty, but I'm fine with uncertainty at plus money.
Last thing I want to mention too, Wonder Boy's last fight against Kevin Holland, not only was he wobbled, he was also just taken down multiple times and Holland let him get back up. If Holland stays in top position there and dominates him on the mat, dominates a 40-year-old Wonder Boy, gets dominated by a striker, what do we make this line against somebody who can actually grapple? So that to me was a sign that the athleticism at 40 years old may be completely gone. If he's getting taken down with the potential to get held down by a striker, Holland just let him up and let him keep fighting, which wasn't to his benefit, especially if you bet the Holland side, but Pereira is not going to do that.
The only issue I have with that is counting on Pereira's fight IQ to be that much higher. It doesn't feel like the safest bet. Like, he's not a guy that I'm confident will come in with the best game plan, but he certainly has the tools to do so if he does come in with the best game plan. So, we're banking on that a little bit, but again, it's plus money. That's the kind of bet we like to make.
Co-main event features former lightweight winner, number 3 ranked contender in Jan Blachowicz, and he takes on former middleweight title holder in Alex Pereira. This line has moved slightly. Money coming in on Pereira. He's now minus 105. Blachowicz is at minus 115 over at FanDuel. Zerillo, when we look at this fight, and if the cardio angle matters here too, please share. We know Jan's an older fighter. How would you assess this one, and how would you like to bet it?
Yeah, I think if either fighter does have the cardio advantage, it's likely to be Pereira, not going to be the one trying to offensively wrestle here. Slightly younger and also moving up a division, so not having to cut weight, I think, is to his benefit in terms of cardio. See if he's able to be a bit looser with his striking too, just because doesn't have to be as worried about gassing out. But I think really why most people would look to bet Jan in this spot is the questionable nature of Pereira's MMA grappling. He hasn't been in MMA that long. He came over from professional kickboxing, and the fighters who have been able to take him down in the past have shown a good amount of success doing so. But he's now had multiple years training under Glover Teixeira. He's shown a decent get-up game, the ability to fight for hooks, not comfortable just laying on his back, accepting position. And the only time we really saw Jan dominate an opponent with the wrestling was Israel Adesanya, but Israel's smaller than him, whereas Pereira is the bigger opponent than even Jan is, even though Pereira is moving up in weight. And additionally, that fight was in the UFC Apex in the smaller cage, where Jan didn't have to close as much distance. Izzy didn't have as much room to escape on the outside. So I think in a normal size cage where Pereira is clearly the better kickboxer and also just the bigger man, couple inches taller, 1 inch reach advantage, I don't think Jan is going to have as much success just plowing him over and bullying him into takedowns like he did with Izzy, who has a much smaller frame. So if Jan doesn't land takedowns, I don't think he wins this fight. I think he needs to land at least one and then have a competitive striking round to have a chance of winning this fight. The one thing I do want to mention, though, Jan being 40 years old, Pereira coming back 3 months after a hellacious knockout loss to Izzy. I mean, Izzy sent him to Narnia. And that was 3 months ago. So that is my one concern betting the Pereira side. He's moving up in weight, fighting a guy who can actually hit hard. I did mention in my write-up, though, I think Jan's Polish power is a bit overrated. 9 career knockouts in 39 fights. One of them was a TKO injury for Alexander Rakic. The other guys he knocked out, all chinny, or guys who moved up in weight, like Dominic Reyes. I really think Jan's power in general is kind of overrated. He has that legendary Polish power myth, but I think the power discrepancy is massively in Pereira's favor here. So I like Pereira on the money line. I think he can win a decision with volume, and I think he can knock out Jan as well. So I like his knockout prop in terms of a round robin bet, but definitely going with the money line for my bet here.
All right, so Zerillo maps out some worthy concerns for both fighters, winds up on Pereira. Billy, I know in your luck ratings you account for this as well. The Pereira shift in weight class is pretty fascinating, and Blachowicz has got the age. He's on the wrong side of 40 years old, it seems. So how would you like to go about it?
Yeah, I'm going to tell you guys why I'm not concerned with Alex Pereira's chin here.
Okay.
Because you have to hit him for the chin to matter. And I don't see Jan landing anything, too clean on him here. Jan is a very good MMA kickboxer. Alex Pereira is a excellent kickboxer, full stop. He was a world champion at this sport. I don't really worry about him getting hit. Jan didn't really catch Izzy with anything clean, finally started winning the fight when he grappled. I just don't see that being a big concern here. If he was fighting, another 205er, if he was fighting Jamal Hill and Hill was healthy, guy with good hands, would totally get that concern. Less concerned here. And, Sean said it best. Jan probably needs to get some takedowns to win here. And I'm just not going to bet on that to happen. Because when he fought Israel Adesanya, he wasn't chain wrestling. He wasn't switching from single legs to high crotches and ducking under and hitting sit-outs and any of that. He was just like big brothering him. Like he kind of just grabbed him and pushed him down because he was bigger and stronger. He's not bigger and stronger than Alex Pereira. So that plan's not going to work. Even if it works briefly, we've talked about the elevation a lot, but continuously wrestling is probably the hardest thing to do from a cardio standpoint, especially against a massive, strong person like Alex Pereira. And Pereira is going to use that Derek Lewis jiu-jitsu where he just kind of stands up being bigger and stronger than you and makes you take him down again. Can Jan do it once? Sure. But he probably needs at least 2 to get this fight. And he needs to get some control time while he's there. And he needs to get knocked out by probably the most dangerous striker we've ever had in the UFC. That's a big ask for a 40-year-old guy who's looked a little bit slower his last few fights and fighting at elevation where it's all much harder to do. So more than happy with Pereira at minus 105. I was looking at some knockout or some method of victory props, but they're like the same as his money line at this point, so it's not even worth getting fancy. Just take the money line.
Worth mentioning, Alex, a world champion in kickboxing, not only at middleweight, but also at light heavyweight too. So multi-division kickboxing champion and has fought, fighters of this size in the past. So it's, the size I don't think is going to be an issue at all.
Right.
Okay, we do have best bets, and we do have a FanDuel parlay we will share before the show concludes. I promise, I should say this, because for third segment in a row, there will be some alignment here between Billy and Sean Zerillo. They do not. I mean, they're friendly, don't get me wrong, but they don't really confront each other. They put their picks in, and then it's like, oh, you picked the same thing I did, which makes them feel great about each other, and I'm sure about their own analysis. Don't get me wrong, but they didn't confront each other before this. They're in alignment again. So they're in alignment on the same underdog. They're in alignment here on Pereira for the co-main. And Zerillo, when it comes to your favorite prop on the board, something jumped out to you. It's a good plus money that might appease a new bettor to UFC. What might that be? And Billy can add to it.
Yeah, Priscilla Cachoeira to win inside the distance or to win by finish. Depends how it's going to be framed depending on the book. Some books, I believe FanDuel calls it a double chance prop. So it'll be Priscilla Cachoeira to win by TKO, KO, or submission. That's how you'll find it framed on FanDuel. But inside the distance, typically what we refer to it as, and she is plus 450 to win inside the distance. The betting market is basically telling you that if Cachoeira wins, she's going to win by finish 55% of the time. I think it's closer to 65%. So immediately that's where I get my value from. I also made her money line closer to plus 200, where the market has her closer to plus 240. So I think there's value both on Cachoeira to win by finish and also on the money line. And I don't think she's incapable of winning the decision here. In fact, this is the type of fight where Miranda Maverick, her opponent, might land takedowns and have control time, but may not do much with them. And then once they pop back to the feet, Cachoeira may just do more in the limited striking exchanges to seal what could be close rounds where the judges are weighing her striking against Maverick's control time. So I think a decision is certainly something she's capable of winning, and I'm interested in playing her money line. I just think her money line or her finish prop should be more skewed to her money line price, and they should be just a little bit narrower. Career 60% finish rate, I believe, 7 over 12 wins. So my projection and the market projection kind of in between where her actual career number is. But yeah, and the way she fights, the way she goes for it, her nickname Zombie Girl. If you've never watched Priscilla Cachoeira, you'll find out very quickly. There's few fighters in women's MMA quite with her physicality or her aggression or her tenacity. And she's the type of fighter I will literally always bet to win inside the distance in every one of her fights. It's just how she fights. So Cachoeira, ITD plus 450. I know Billy's aligned with me. And my play last week was Julia Stoliarenko inside the distance at plus 300. And she's a similar fighter who I'm always going to bet to win by finish.
Cachoeira, pardon me, is down to plus 420 for exactly what you're talking about. So that market's moving. Dive in ASAP. Billy, what can you add?
Yeah, I think just this fight specifically, her winning percentage should be much higher towards the inside the distance for a couple of reasons. One, the elevation. We keep talking about it. You know, even if she's not dominating her right out of the gate, we have a much higher chance of those late stoppages where one fighter just hits a wall than we normally have. So, you know, that 60% career rate, I think it's pretty safe to bump that up a little bit higher this time. The other reason is this one kind of flew under the radar, but Miranda Maverick took this one on short notice. She fought just over a month ago. Again, fighting in short notice at elevation seems like one of the toughest things to do. I also think just the timing of it works out really poorly for Miranda Maverick because she had about 2 weeks off after the last fight, which is just kind of enough time to enjoy yourself, get a little bit out of shape, and then get the call that you have to go do it 2 weeks later. If she had, taken this one 3 days after her last fight, you go, oh yeah, she's still in camp. She might even be in better shape. I don't think that's how it's going to play out here. I have no inside information on how hard Miranda Maverick trains when she's not in a fight camp, but just my intuition and being around fighters and knowing how that works, don't think it's a good sign for her. And yeah, I mean, Sean nailed it. She's Cachoeira is probably not going to win a decision. Most of her equity is just on finishing people because she'll walk through hell to do it. So like it, even at plus 420, I would take it down probably plus 375 or so off the top of my head if I had to set a limit.
And I consider betting the fight to end inside the distance, but Maverick doesn't really strike me as a finisher herself. Cachoeira also very durable, but if Maverick finishes, it's likely to be on the mat. I don't think her submission game is particularly slick. So I could see Cachoeira getting back up, getting Roy back into the fight, even if she's getting dominated on the mat. I see the fight to end inside the distance. The juice keeps coming further and further towards a finish. It was minus 120. Now it's minus 150, but I'd rather be on the Cachoeira side of that inside the distance equity than, having both fighters.
Billy, what are you doing for those 2 weeks when you were fighting? Were you in ship shape?
I'm going to be honest, it depended on whether I won or lost. If I won a fight, we were hitting drive-through on the way home, beers after that, just having a good time. if I lost a fight, you might catch me Sunday morning at 10 a.m. back in the gym. So everyone's different, obviously. And, the financial rewards were drastically different for me than they are even at the lower end of the UFC pay scale. So I could see her taking some time off. I believe she lost her last one, correct, Sean?
Yeah.
Maybe she was super motivated. Maybe, she caught a flight home and Sunday morning was training again. I don't know. But I do know that taking a fight at elevation on short notice is never going to help you, right?
Yeah, we were on Jasmine Jasudavicius against her in Canada. That was a big underdog win. And, a fight where Miranda was out-grappled. And anytime you see a fighter who's supposed to have a grappling advantage get out-grappled, for instance, Jan Blachowicz dominated Izzy on the mat, has been out-grappled in his past 3 fights. So how good is his grappling, right? You sort of downgrade them slightly in the area where they're supposed to have a strength. It's like, why don't we like Cachoeira more than we do? So,
and Maverick might have stayed in shape, but she certainly didn't improve her wrestling significantly in the last month, right? Like when you're training for a fight, you're not really improving skills. So for her to be training for a fight and then training for another fight immediately, she didn't go to wrestling camp in the last month. So that's not going to be any better than it was at that point.
And she's young and at the age where she would be improving too if she took significant time off. So, if she was coming back 6 months later, she's 26 years old, I would have a much different opinion of her than a few weeks after her loss.
I'm just happy you're not a bad loser and you're highly motivated after a loss. That's good to know. If a pick doesn't go well, Billy is right back on the computer, breaking it down, getting ready for the following week. It's the same logic, I would think. Before we go, we've got the parlay coming up, and it's going to mimic a lot of what these guys have discussed. Best bets for UFC 291. Zerillo, where did you land?
Yeah, Tony Ferguson and Bobby Green fight to end inside the distance. Our MMA editor, Dan Stupp, stole this out from under me, so you won't see me writing this up in our best bets article for this week, but I would have had Dan not claimed it first. Tony on a 5-fight losing streak, 39 years old. Typically a fighter on a 5-fight losing streak would no longer be in the UFC. UFC wants to continue to give him opportunities, I guess, or potentially build up somebody else against him in Bobby Green, who's coming in here as a significant favorite. No interest in playing Tony as an underdog. I like this fight to end inside the distance at -110, projected at closer to -120. I would lean to Bobby to win it inside the distance. And in fact, I'll probably be using his knockout line in parlays. I just think the hand speed differential here is going to be massive. Tony has just looked like he's been stuck in mud in his recent fights. Bobby actually looked pretty slick in his last fight against Jared Gordon prior to the no contest being called, but he was coming off of a knockout loss. Looked like he got right back into form. Tony has been declining with each subsequent fight. Finished in 3 out of his last 5 losses. The 2 that he wasn't finished in, he probably should have tapped out because it seemed like Beneil Dariush and Charles Oliveira broke off separate limbs of his, and then he just couldn't move in his last fight against Nate Diaz. Ended up getting finished in the 4th round. Might have been the first time he's tapped in his entire career, which is probably a bad sign too, that he's willing to quit after being beat up. But for this particular matchup, what I think is interesting, Bobby Green, the much better boxer, much faster hands, he's at a 4-inch reach discrepancy. So if he wants to hit Tony, he's going to have to get right in his face, make this a telephone booth fight. I think he's going to touch him up quite a bit and eventually put him away attritionally. So Bobby Green to win inside the distance, I think is interesting, but just betting the fight to end inside the distance at a pick'em price, I think is the way to go.
Okay, and Billy, a best bet for UFC 291 in Salt Lake City.
Yeah, I've toyed with this fight, or this bet, I should say, a little bit since writing up the full breakdown of it, but I'm looking at Michael Chiesa in round 3 or by decision at plus 250. I think the vast majority of that value comes on the decision line. I like adding the round 3 in there as well, just because, with the elevation, with all the things we've talked about, we could see a late stoppage. But he's fighting Kevin Holland. We talked about earlier how awful Kevin Holland's fight IQ is. Holland's one of those guys, he's a little bit more interested in picking up a win bonus or picking up a performance bonus than he is necessarily a win bonus. But these guys are both super durable. Chiesa's only knockout loss was via cut. Holland has very good submission defense. He's a jiu-jitsu black belt. I just think Chiesa wins more of the minutes here, right? Has some of the best scrambling and top game I've seen in the UFC, which should be enough to get Holland to the ground. Holland at one point retired because he was sick of fighting grapplers. That was literally what he said. He said, I'm only coming back if you give me another striker. And they gave him a couple. They let him fight Stephen Thompson, but then they threw him right back in there with another guy who barely even attempts to strike, wrestles, likes to get on top. Really good guard passing. I'm very impressed by that, and is going to just win every scramble. Michael Chiesa is awesome in that area. I'm a little concerned that with the current judging system, that Holland's damage steals him a decision when Chiesa is wrestling him all over the place. So if you share that concern, a little bit less juicy odds, but over 2.5, I think it's like plus 145 last I looked. Also a solid bet. That was the one I almost went with. I just think that judges are sophisticated enough to know the difference between Michael Chiesa being in half guard or side control or full mount versus hanging out inside of a guy's guard and not really doing much. I don't feel super confident saying that. We've seen some awful judging. We're relying on the judges to tell the damage of a leg kick in the main event in the pick that I'm making. So it's scary, but I think they'll be there. I could also see Holland just gassing himself out, doing wild stuff, and then getting finished in the third round. So getting both of those in there at plus 250, solid pick. But if you want a little bit safer option, I was really surprised to see the over 2.5 at plus money, given the durability of these guys, given the fact that Chiesa doesn't even try to hit anyone, and that he's never been knocked out himself.
All right, gents, this is what we cooked up for a FanDuel UFC 291 parlay. The double Pereira moneyline pick. Michel Pereira moneyline, Alex Pereira moneyline, and the main event as we hit off the top in Poirier and Gaethje for the fight to end inside the distance. Comes out to plus 521 over at the FanDuel Sportsbook. Either of you want to weigh in here? I know we kind of hit on the analysis, but why, Billy, you might want to, these are the three that you'd like to lean to?
Yeah, real quick. Obviously when we're doing a 3-leg parlay, we want the safer options that we agree on versus like Priscilla Cachoeira inside the distance at plus 400. I will say if Michel Pereira ends up not fighting, go ahead and throw a Cachoeira money line in there. It'll be a big juicy one, small stakes. Let's do responsible gambling here. That would be my favorite pivot, not the inside the distance, just her money line. That's more than juicy enough. But with that being the other one we agree on, kind of makes sense as an alternate option if it's needed.
Okay. Cirillo, anything to add?
No, Billy and I, as you said, Brandon, we don't pre-plan, who's going to be on what pick. We have a document. Billy's picks are usually in there first. I go through my card. Sometimes I go into the document when I'm ready to put my picks in and I go, crap, Billy's on the other side of 3 fights from I am. But on this card in particular, we're on the same side of a bunch of fights. So it's nice to see. It's nice to have that alignment, get the same reads. And really, Billy didn't talk much about the main event and inside the distance, but he volunteered that to me as the third leg. So that made me pretty confident, along with our money line plays, that these were the right three to go with.
All right, fellas, good stuff. Billy Ward, Sean Zerillo, here are their picks. We'll show the recap now here on the weigh-in. Here's what we got going on for the evening on Saturday. Billy's on the Gaethje money line. Keep an eye. Billy might jump in live as well, but he will go with the Gaethje money line pre-fight pick. Zerillo likes to fight to end inside the distance. Both are on Michel Pereira as an underdog. They both like Alex Pereira in the co-main event on the money line. Priscilla Cachoeira inside the distance. Zerillo gave that out. So did Billy. They're both aligned on that. Is it Chiesa? Chiesa, right? Chiesa round 3 decision is Billy's best bet. And then the Ferguson Green fight to end inside the distance is Sean Zerillo's best bet on the board for UFC 291. Again, folks, FanDuel is our presenting sponsor. They have an exclusive offer for viewers. Get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. So you bet $20, you land $200 in bonus bets. Win or lose, terms and conditions apply. I think that's it. Oh, also, keep an eye or use this as a reference. Billy Ward has his UFC luck ratings up on the Action Network website, in the Action Network app. UFC 291 luck ratings, great resource if you are kind of diving in for the first time and just need some extra analysis in the written form. And Zerillo's got his write-up as well, previewing the entire card. So that is also useful information that you might want to check out. Make sure to tune into the fights, again, starting at 8 Eastern, ESPN Plus, pay-per-view for the main card to see how the picks play out. And again, as I said, stay locked into the Action Network app if these guys add anything or if there's any other articles and insight that you can use as a resource. For Zerillo, Billy Ward, Brendan Glasheen, thanks for watching the weigh-in presented by FanDuel. Enjoy the fights, good luck, and talk to you next week. See ya.